Welcome to the walkthrough of the BPA Option 1 Custom Project Calculator. This calculator is used for the submittal of custom projects for all Option 1 utilities. The calculator itself contains a number of tabs, in particular 5 tabs that will be of importance to you. The first is Proposal, second Measure Input, Completion Report, Project Summary, and Measure List. This calculator replaces the previous Custom Project Proposal, Custom Project Calculator, and Custom Project Completion Report that were used under the Interim System 1. Today we're going to walk through each of the input tabs and walk through the order in which you would input information into the proposal if you were completing a custom project. So you always will be starting with the Proposal tab when proposing at the beginning of a project. A couple of things to notice in this tab. First of all, there are blue bars at the start of each section. The one I'm pointing to now is Project Information. On the left it'll have the title of the section, and then over to the right in column H will be the number of fields that still need to be entered. There are a number of fields that are required, so this will populate letting you know how many fields need entering. Also in column H, below that 28 fields, there's Example Entry and Format. This gives you an example of what kind of information you would be entering into that field. Slightly to the left of that, in column F, you'll notice that there is a required or optional field. This is important to let you know whether that field is required or whether it's optional. If it's required, of course, you'll have to input information into it. And if it's optional, you don't have to. So I'm going to walk you through, show you what each of these fields are, and describe what goes into them. I'll enter some dummy data as I go through so that you can get an example of how the calculator works. So to start off with, some basic project information. For starters, the project name. So we're going to call this Building A HVAC for simplicity. After the project name, an important date is the date submitted. And this date would be populated with the date that you'll be submitting the proposal. Something to note on here, all of these fields are also included in the instructions for the Option 1 Custom Project Calculator, which is also available in the Implementation Manual Document Library on the BPA Energy Efficiency website. And that gives you, if you can't remember what each of these fields means, that information is contained in the instructions. So we'll make a date submitted. We'll pick something in the past. The next field, serving utility. Pretty straightforward. You're hopefully with a utility, you're just going to pick a drop down and pick your serving utility. So we're just going to pick Ashland because it's close to the top of the alphabet here. The next fields are for the proposal submitter name and proposal submitter email. This is yourself, whoever's submitting the proposal as the representative at the utility. So I'm just making up a name because that's easy here. Then proposal submitter email. That's your email address. That lets the folks at BPA know when it's submitted, who submitted this and how to contact them. And then finally, phone number, which of course is just your phone. So we'll put that, make up a number in here too. So moving down, I'm going to skip some of these entries just so you can walk through each of these. The next section asks for information about the company where this project is taking place. So if it's taking place at, say, a hospital, you might enter the name of the hospital, the company mailing address, city, state, and zip. Now this is the mailing address, not necessarily the site address. So if you have an owner who's out of state or at an off-site, you would enter their mailing address there. The next section down addresses facilities. So this is where you would enter a facility street address, facility, city, state, zip. And an optional field is building name. We find this to be helpful particularly at sites where there's multiple buildings. If you have one site and you've got building A, B, C, and D, you might want to note here that this is a project in building A. Continuing through the basic information section, the project contact name would be an employee at a facility. Complete that information. The employee name, the job title, phone number, and email, so there's contact info. Row 23, if this is an industrial project and you've worked with an Energy Smart industrial partner, you would put their name there, and that just helps BPA know who worked on the project. I'm going to scroll down a little bit here to see the next section. So after you've entered the project contact information, we get into the section about this particular project. And this gives some basic information about the project itself. So project sector, that's going to be like commercial, industrial, agricultural, and that is a drop-down menu. So you can get that in the drop-down. Primary building use indicates what kind of building it is. This is also a drop-down. So you want to select the most appropriate building type from the drop-down. If there's nothing that really matches, there is an other category, although we definitely encourage you to use the most appropriate building type whenever possible. That helps with for evaluation purposes. And if it's industrial, there is a general industrial facility selection. Secondary building type would be the second use of the building. So if you have a multi-use facility, say an office retail combination, and the majority is office, a small percentage of it is retail, you could enter office in the primary and retail in secondary. And then for industrial projects, process type would be an option, and you would need to fill this out, and that indicates the process type. Again, drop downs, pick the most appropriate. Resource opportunity type. This is a sort of fancy way of saying, is it retrofit, major renovation, or new construction? So you'd select from there. And this is important because you'll want the resource opportunity type for the proposal to align with the resource opportunity types for the measures that you enter. Federal, yes, no. Just asked if it's a federal facility. This helps us track savings in for federal facilities. Then utility assigned project ID. So this is an ID that you as the utility would be assigning to a project. Might be project 1, 2, 3, whatever system you use. Different, may or may not be different from the unique site ID. Oftentimes folks use an account number as a unique site ID because there's only going to be one of those within your system, and you'll be able to identify it by the account. And finally, estimated project start date is an important date. So I entered an August date as my submittal date. If I enter a July date here as my estimated project start date, which is before the submittal date, you'll see that I get in row 33, see re-enter the above date, start date must be after submission date. So this does help you, just reminds you that the project start date needs to be after the submittal date. So I'll fix that, we'll make that early in September. All right. And then moving down into the next section, there are a few questions, one required, a couple optional. Is the project associated with an energy project manager via the Energy Smart Industrial program? If it's participating in that program, you would select yes, and then would populate the name of the energy project manager in row 35. If a technical service provider was used through the ESI program on this, the number could be entered here. And then finally, in row 37 is a required section of brief project summary. So you might enter upgrade the HVAC system, add ventilation. So at this point, I'm going to continue to scroll down here into the next section. So the next section is estimated funding and payment information. You can see here in column H that fields still need to be entered. So here you will want to enter your utility retail rate. I'm going to enter 5 cents here. This does generate an error if your utility retail rate is too small. It asks if you plan to use large project fund, so this is just a yes/no. If you did not use the large project fund, you'd enter no. Then ask some funding percentages. So percentage BPA reimbursement requested in EEI, percent in LPF. So if you're planning to request less than the full reimbursement in available reimbursement in EEI, you could populate it here. However, I'm going to recommend that this funding and payment section is actually completed after you put in the measures so that you have a good sense of what the payment and available reimbursement actually are before you determine and how much you want. Unless you actually know that you want 100%, in which case you can go ahead and put 100%. But if you're wondering how much that money that actually means, populating the measure input will tell you that. And then one other required field in here in row 48 is, are you requesting progress payments? So I'm going to select no here, but if you were requesting progress payments, that is where you would indicate that, and that would tell your COTR that you were requesting them. Moving down to the next section, additional project information has all entirely optional fields. These are defined in the instructions. You can use them if you like, but are entirely optional and do not have to be entered. So moving down again into the next section, beginning in row 56, we have some of the more narrative sections. These will probably look familiar from the proposals you're used to. So initially, the first is project description. Scroll down a little bit more so you can see the sections here. And this is where you're going to basically describe what this project is. So describe the existing system or the baseline condition, and then describe the proposed system. And when you're writing in these text fields, these are merged cells. So if you are copying and pasting from another document, you'll want to copy the text and then click in the formula bar up above on Excel and paste it there. If you try to copy from another document and then paste directly in the cell, you may get an error. So recommend using that formula bar to solve that problem. The same goes for any of these sections where there is a big group of merged cells. Excel is good at some things and sometimes not great at others. In word processing, it has some challenges with copy and paste, so bear with it and please use the formula bar. So scrolling down into the next section, again, these should look familiar from proposals if you've worked with them before. The energy savings estimate and calculations. So here's where you would describe the energy savings estimate and the calculations. If you need to attach additional documentation and supporting documents, you'll want to send those along with your custom project calculator when it's submitted, but a description of it is requested here. Moving on down to the next section, also an important section, is the measurement and verification plan. So we'll let this begins in row 100. And here it requests that you describe the measurement and verification plan, and this is required, of course. And then in row 115, what is the estimated M&V completion date? And that gives a sense of when the project may complete. Moving down the calculator again. After the M&V, we're sort of in the estimated completion stage, is the estimated project costs. So here's where you would describe the estimated project cost. This is required again and again. If you need to provide supporting documentation, you can do that through the submittal. At this point, you've completed all of the basic proposal entries, and the next section is the eligibility criteria checklist. Now, at this point, you will need to go over to the measure input and populate the measures before you can actually answer these questions, because these do include the project simple payback and the expected project benefit cost ratio, and in order to know those, we need to look at the measure input. So at this point, I'm going to switch over one tab to the right to measure input. So when we look at the measure input, I want to point out a couple of things in this field, or in this tab. First of all, in rows 4 and 5 are where you'll want to look for whether a field is required at proposal or at completion stage. So row 4 shows whether it's required at proposal, required or optional. NA means not required, and you wouldn't want to put it in there, so that's completed data. And then row 5 is for completion reports. So in cells where you would have input some data at proposal, it will say same as proposal, because you don't need to update that for the completion report. However, there is new information that needs to be populated, and for those it says required. So just something to remember as a place to cheat and look at what's required at proposal and completion report. So you begin entering in row 8 in this cell, in this tab, and the first thing it asks for is measure ref no. So that's the measure reference number. At this point, where you would go is all the way to the right to the measure list. So we've included all of the measures in this tab measure list, and I'm going to use the auto filters on this top row to find the measure that I want. So I'm going to start filtering with resource opportunity type. And for this project, let's just say that it is a retrofit project. So that is R. If I looked in the header, I would know that R is retrofit. L is lost opportunity, which is the term for the new construction major renovation. So I'll hit OK, and that filters one way. Next, I will look at sector. So I picked a commercial project. So in this, for sector, I am going to undo the select all and just select commercial. and this will just filter down to commercial. Continuing to the right, so it goes sector, end use, category, and then technology, activity, practice. So you can think about this as starting big and you're narrowing it down as you move to the right. So in end use, this was an HVAC project, so going to filter just to look at the HVAC measures. And a note on this filtering, I think once you start to use the calculator a little bit and see some common projects, you'll probably find some common reference numbers and measures that you find yourself using again and again, because there are projects such as like insulation that you might see multiple times. So this is an HVAC system improvement because I'm doing an upgrade. So anytime you're improving the system, improving the efficiency, that's probably going to be called an upgrade. So I'll select by improvement. And then I don't really have to filter down anymore. Technology, activity, practice. I am going to filter down one more, even though I can see them all, and find the actual piece of equipment that I'm installing here. So I'll undo the select all, and this is going to be we'll do a variable refrigerant flow system. Scroll down a little bit. And this will be the last filter needed to actually determine my reference number for this project. So once you've filtered it, you look all the way to the left in column A, and that is the reference number. So I'm going to grab the cell and I'm just going to copy that. Okay. So I'd copy that cell so that I have grabbed the reference number, and then come back over to the measure input, the tab that we were on earlier. And here I have this cell right here waiting for measure reference number. So I'll right click on my computer again, paste the cell that I put there. Alright, and now we see that to the left in column A, so it's populated that to say variable refrigerant flow system improvement, so I can double check that that is indeed the right technology, activity, practice. Moving to the right, measure name is optional, but it may be helpful, for example, if you're doing multiple of a similar measure within one project, you may want to name it VRF1 or 2 or whatever the number is appropriate, name is appropriate. Measure cost, so estimated proposal cost will be required at the proposal stage. Enter that. It's an extremely low cost for installing this system, but why it's a demonstration. Site savings is the estimated site savings for that project. And if there are non-energy benefits or O&M cost changes associated with this measure, they would be entered here. You'll notice these are optional fields, column H and column J, because not all projects have these annual non-energy benefits or O&M cost change. So I do want to show you, if you look to the right on this sheet, you'll notice that there are a lot of fields. These fields may look familiar as some of the fields that were in the previous cost effectiveness calculator. So this shows the eligible reimbursement rate based on the measure you've selected and the submission date, the estimated BC ratio, calculated estimated reimbursement, savings at bus bar, and a number of other pieces of data to the right. So at this point, you would have completed all of if it was only one measure, completed all the information for the project. So I'm going to flip back to the proposal. Coming back over to the proposal tab, now that all the measures have been input, we would start with the eligibility criteria checklist, because we now have the information input for the measures to calculate the estimated simple payback and an estimated BC ratio. As you'll notice down here in row 145 and 146, the simple payback and BC ratio have been pulled over into this tab so that you can see those while you're completing the criteria checklist. So I'm just going to go through and enter yes for each of these. These are the same questions that are on the current custom project calculator and were asked in the PTR. And these just ensure that the project, these are your opportunity to verify and state that the project meets all of the custom project requirements. I'm just going to go through and populate it with yes so that the project is in order and will let us look at data in the future. And these are each drop down. So yes and no are the only answers allowed for these cells. Makes it easy. Can't provide any other answers. So down here, as we get into row 142, you see the question about the expected, question 8, the expected project simple payback is 6 months or greater, and that would be where you'd reference row 145. And in row 143, statement 9, the expected project benefit cost ratio meets the BPA minimum requirement, and again, we'd reference row 146. So now that that is all completed, the one last thing that may need to be done on the proposal, if scrolling down, if you were requesting progress payments, which I said no in this example, so it's not going to require this, but if you were requesting progress payments, this section would need to be completed to specify the time period for, first of all, to complete the checklist and make sure that the project meets the requirements, that it's time period requirements, the amount of progress payments, the estimated incentive. As long as those are all answered affirmatively, you come down to the summary, and here you provide a summary of the progress payment request. So how many progress payments you're requesting, what the milestones are, and what the expected amount of reimbursement and expected dates of milestones are very important. And there's clarification in the implementation manual. So at that point, once you've completed the proposal and added your measures in, the calculator should be ready for submittal to BPA at the proposal stage. One last place you can check to see what the numbers look like is this project summary tab. I'm going to click on that and scroll up to the top of the page. So when you look at the project summary, there are two columns, B and C. The project proposal data is located in column B. So this just shows based on the measures that you input, and if you input multiple measures, it would be tallying the totals here. The site KWH at proposal, the savings at bus bar, what you input for the percentage EEI funding requested, and then the calculated requested BPA reimbursement based on that percentage, the KWH savings, the project, scrolling down to 18, the project costs, project BC ratio, simple payback, and project cost cap, and all the way down here in row 28 is the final requested BPA reimbursement. So that would be the number. If you look at that, you'll see that that's the number that you're actually asking for BPA to approve. Scrolling down even further, one thing I want to point out is this errors section. There are a number of errors that will populate here to let you know why something might not be working. So say you didn't enter the retail rate at the proposal stage, this error section would say utility retail rate must be entered. And you notice that a lot of the fields wouldn't be populating in the project summary. So if you have gone through a project and you notice that the project summary is not populating at proposal stage, look at this error field. It might tell you what's wrong and help you figure out what to fix. Right now, it's only saying COTR must approve proposal before the completion data can be calculated, which I've only filled in proposal data, so that's okay. But if I were looking at this and I'd filled in my completion data, this might be a red flag that I hadn't gotten the COTR approval and didn't have that field populated, so it wasn't ready for completion report data. So at this point, once you've completed the proposal, this calculator would be emailed to BPA at the eedocs@bpa.gov email address, and that would route it to your COTR and to your engineer for project review. Now, after the project review has been completed, they will send this calculator back to you, and you can use the same calculator for submitting your completion report.